Welcome to Success Story, the most useful podcast in the world. I'm your host, Scott D. Clary. The Success Story podcast is brought to you by the HubSpot Podcast Network, the audio destination for business professionals. The HubSpot Podcast Network has other amazing podcasts like No Straight Path, hosted by Ashley Menzies Babatunde. Now, by shedding light on the stories behind the shiny resumes, social media highlights, and job titles, No Straight Path aims to humanize success from the millennial perspective. Featuring guests from all walks of life, No Straight Path aims to inspire conversations around the nuanced perspectives of success. Now, if some of these topics hit home, you're going to love this show. Success is all about maximizing happiness. An interview with Esther Agbaji about finding your voice. Success is communal with Yvonne Doc Aswad. Now, if these topics are interesting to you, make sure to check out No Straight Path wherever you listen to your podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. John Demartini. He is a human behavior specialist. He's an internationally published author, educator, and a profound authority on maximizing human awareness and potential. Dr. Demartini uncovers how business owners and leaders can gain more balance and clarity of purpose by aligning themselves with their highest values. Dr. Demartini has been featured internationally. He was in the acclaimed film The Secret, exploring the laws of attraction, power of thought, and application in achieving entrepreneurial success. But before you jump to conclusions, he is a science-based, logic-based, and data-backed individual who can actually show you how mindset and value can deliver success through changes that actually occur in your body. He debunks myths on motivation and explains that negative self-talk and procrastination is really the result of unrealistic expectation, a sign that we have to get real and properly understand ourselves. He's worked extensively with successful business leaders, multinational corporations on professional development, leadership, finance, entrepreneurship, scalability. He reveals key teachings in all of his content, his YouTube, his classes, his courses when he consults for entrepreneurial success and self-mastery. He has been doing this for over 40 years. He's a well-known name in personal and professional development and mastery. What do we speak about? We spoke about his origin story, a certain point in his life when he was homeless, which transitioned into a point in his life when he almost died, which has then pushed him towards, this moment in his life pushed him towards learning and teaching and doing what he does now, which is ultimately helping people discover their values, why it's important to discover your values, why you have to align your values with what you're doing in your life, and ultimately how to understand if your values are actually serving you as well as they possibly could, and if they're not, how to change your values so that everything you do is, I don't want to say effortless, but it just feels like everything you do is aligned with who you are as a person, which ultimately gives you more energy, more clarity, more enthusiasm, which will lead to undoubtedly more success. So let's jump right into this. This is Dr. John Demartini. He is a best-selling author. He is an educator, a speaker, an authority, and ultimately a human behavior specialist.
My journey is as a professional speaker and educator for over 49 years now, I just full-time research, write, travel, and teach. I every day, pretty well every single day of my life, I'm doing that. So I started that journey at age really 17. And I think that was a perfect expression of some of the childhood challenges I had. When I was born, I had a speech impediment, and I went to a speech pathologist from age 1.5 to 4 and had to wear buttons and strings in my mouth. So I think that was probably a void that made me want to learn how to speak properly. I was also born with an arm and leg turned inward, kind of a deformity. and had to wear braces on my arm and leg. And that constraint probably wanted to make sure I traveled, be free. And by the time I was 6, when I started elementary school, my first grade teacher, Mrs. McLaughlin, had my parents come to the school and told my parents, I said, I'm afraid your son's not ever going to be able to read or write effectively because I wrote backwards with dyslexia. And not amount to anything, not go very far in life, probably won't do much in life. If I were you, I'd get him into sports, because when I got out of my braces, all I wanted to do is run. And she said, he can run fast. And I only made it through elementary school by asking the smartest kids questions, which allowed me to pass enough to get through school until I turned 12 to 13. My parents at age 12 moved to a small town where there wasn't a lot of smart kids, low socioeconomic area. We lived in kind of a farming area. And I dropped out of school, and I became a street kid. I lived in a bowling alley, and I lived in a park, and I lived in a car, and, typical street kind of kid. But at age 13, I started surfing at 9. Texas wasn't the surf capital, but I was able to do that. I wasn't able to do much of anything else. But I took up surfing, and the place to go surfing was California. So at 14, I hitchhiked to California and down into Mexico. At 15, I made it over to Hawaii, and I lived under a bridge first, the Kamehameha Highway Bridge, Sunset Beach, then in the Iikai Beach Park under a park bench, then in a bathroom there, then finally an abandoned car, and then a tent. So I kept social climbing, and I became a pretty good surfer. I got to be in some surf magazines and surf movies and surf books. I got to ride big waves, and then almost died at 17, towards the end of 17. And in the recovery of that, I was led to a health food store, and then onto a yoga class where I met Paul C. Bragg, who was a guest lecturer there. And in one night, in 1 hour, this one man inspired me to believe that maybe I could overcome my learning problems, learn how to read and speak properly. I knew I could make a surfboard and ride a board, but I didn't think I was going to be articulate. But that night I had a dream to overcome my learning problems. And with some of the ideas he had said, I thought maybe I could pull it off. So I ended up flying back from Honolulu over to LA, hitchhiking back to Texas, taking a GED test, and guessed and passed that thing. I have no idea, because I didn't read the questions. I just guessed closed my eyes and put a little pencil in a thing, and miraculously passed this thing. Tried to go to school again, failed. And then I said, I don't want to give up on this. And I went to, my mom saw that I'd failed and was really distraught. And she said to me, son, whether you become a great teacher and travel the world, or whether you go back and ride big waves, or you live on the streets, I just want to let you know your father and I are going to love you no matter what you do. We just love you. And I needed to hear that at that moment. And my hand went into a fist, and I looked up and I saw the vision that I had the night I met Paul Bragg of me speaking in front of a group of people. And I said to myself, I'm going to master this thing called reading, teaching, learning, and I'm going to do whatever it takes, travel whatever distance, and pay whatever price to give my service of love across the planet. I'm not going to let any human being stop me, not even myself. And I just got up and hugged my mom and went into my room, and I got a dictionary out, and I just started memorizing 30 words a day until my vocabulary was strong enough to pass school. And then if you do 30 words a day, at the end of a couple of years, you got 20,000 friggin' words in your head. And I did pretty well with that. I just became like a ritual. A machine memorizing words and learning words and applying them. And so I could start reading. And that was one of the most invigorating things of my life. I never stopped the reading thing. I've read over 30,600 books now. And I just read, and I just learned, and I just started, and people started asking me questions, and I started answering them, and my teaching career began. And it started out with one woman who was an Afro-American woman asking me questions, and then another Persian man, and then a group of kids getting out of class wanting me to teach them on mathematics as I was learning it. And then by the time I went to the University of Houston, a 100, 150, sometimes 400 people would gather in the park area at the school and listen and ask questions. And I'd have classes every day. When I went on to professional school, I continued that. And when I got out of there, I started lecturing locally and then citywide, statewide, nationwide. And now I've been blessed to speak in 163 countries. And we reached, a lot of people. And any opportunity to speak and anybody that would listen to me who meant something to me and still does. And I just full-time teach, write, read, travel. I write books. Anything to do with mastering life and human behavior and doing something extraordinary with their life and doing what you really love in life. I really believe that people deserve to do what they love and love what they do every day. And I do everything I can to try to find ways of helping them achieve that, because their life goes by pretty quick, as you know, and I want them to be able to do what they love to do, because I was really blessed by a gentleman that helped me do that.
And when did you decide to, because obviously your love for teaching, your passion for learning and teaching has evolved over the years, and now it's manifested into what you're doing now, what you're teaching now to people that are looking to better understand and perform in their life. When did you realize that this particular topic, like teaching people how to upskill themselves, how to determine their values, how to optimize their life, how to be happy, how to be in sync, how to get the most out of life. When did you choose to go down that path? Because that's a particularly difficult thing to teach. A lot of people probably find it very easy to teach a very tangible thing like a math or a science or a history, but you're trying to move mountains. You're trying to get people to live a better life in business and outside of business. So why did you go down that road?
Well, there's a number of things. Paul Bragg, the night I met him, he mentioned the word universal laws, natural laws. And I didn't really understand what that meant, but I eventually looked that up, and that led to a concept called the logos, which is kind of a mystical thing. And it meant the order and reason of the universe kind of thing. And that led me to ologies. I just kept using the dictionary. And I'm an etymologist, so I love studying the origin of words. And in the process of doing it, I then made a list of every known discipline and ology you could study. And then I looked and realized that the average PhD, as you do multiple PhDs, is about 100 books. And so I just made a commitment that I would read 100 books in every known ology to try to gather the most universal principles that I could get to build a body of knowledge that I could share with people that I could rely on. And so, at 18, I decided I wanted to master my life. It sounded cool, the word mastery, masters of the universe kind of thing. And I thought, wow, that's cool. I want to master them. So I then had to go, what exactly does that mean? And I then decided that I divided life into 7 areas. Our intellectual pursuits and waking up our genius and creativity and innovation so we can create original ideas that can serve people. Our vocational quest, where we can create some sort of a sustainable business and sustainable fair exchange with people that meets people's needs, that remunerates us so we have a great income. I want to master business and have a global business, which I'm blessed to do. I wanted to have financial independence where I'm not working for money. My money is working for me, where passive income way exceeds active income. I'm about 50 times that now. So I'm doing pretty good there. And then I wanted to also have a global family dynamic, which is why I live on the ship called the World, which goes all over the world. I want to have a global family. I learned that from Socrates that Plato wrote about, that they asked him, was he, he said, I'm not a man of Corinth and not a man of Athens. I'm a citizen of the world. And Einstein said, I'm not a man of my family or community or city or state. I'm a citizen of the world, of the universe. And I always thought that's cool. And I wrote that down. I said, I want to be a citizen of the world. And I wanted to go around the world. And so I want a relationship and family dynamic that was global, which I have. Then I want to have social influence. I want to meet the most amazing people on the planet and hang out with them and influence them and participate in people that are the greatest at what they do, the greatest Olympic medalists, the greatest Nobel Prize winners, the greatest, religious leaders. So I set out to hang out and interact with them. I think I'm about 3,900 of those people now. And then I also wanted to have a vital body, an energized body. I'm 67 going on 68, and I usually work circles around most people less age than me. So I'm doing pretty good there. And I also wanted to create an inspired movement, not a religion. I'd let people do whatever they do with religion, but I just want to help people live inspired lives where they feel that they had some sort of inspired mission. And so to me, all 7 of those areas can be empowered. And in any area of our life we don't empower, somebody else overpowers us. If we don't empower ourselves intellectually, we get told what to think. We don't empower ourselves in business, we're told what to do. If we don't empower ourselves in finance, we're told what we're worth. If we don't empower ourselves in relationship, we're doing honeydew stuff around the house that we could be delegating. If we don't empower ourselves socially, we'll be told propaganda and misinformation, which we've certainly seen. And if we don't empower ourselves in physical, we'll be told what drugs to take and what organs to remove. And if we don't empower ourselves spiritually, we'll be following some, geocentric Aristotelian construct that's probably finite, instead of a universal scheme that the James Webb Telescope is going to give us and continue our mystery studies. So I'm a firm believer in doing something extraordinary with our life and empower those to whatever level and whatever area that you want. If you want to do them all, I'm all for that. But I wanted to study everything I could that would allow me to help myself and others master that and do something extraordinary with those areas. That's been my dream and still my dream. And I work on that every day. I mean, that's made me study a lot of disciplines to help that: economics and financial management, wealth building and business management. And I've met a lot of people in all those fields, Nobel Prize winners and religious leaders. So I've been blessed to, because of that one pursuit, gather information that I feel, strongly that can help people. And I love that. I know you, because you have the podcast, what it's like to have somebody
100%.
say, you transform my life. That's the most inspiring thing that I get to do, is to get in thousands of letters by people saying, you've helped me do this, or that, I've been able to do this. My gratitude journal, which I write every day, is mostly filled with students' accomplishments. That's the thing that inspires me the most. So I love that.
You've taken these 7 things that you want to empower in your life, and the way I see it, and correct me if I'm oversimplifying, but the way I see it is now that's actually what has turned into what you teach over. You're teaching over the steps that you've actually implemented in your own life. So this is when you speak about determining your value. Everything you just said right there is a value that you internalize, that you have built out and extrapolated on and learned about and investigated. And that's what has made you fulfilled, happy, successful, all the things that people want to be. Now, let's talk about those. Let's talk about those. Let's talk about the framework. Let's talk about the framework if somebody's trying to do what you've done, because that's incredible. A lot of people do not have clarity on maybe like one of those things, any major focus in their life. A lot of people lack a lot of clarity in business and in their personal life. So let's walk through that framework, because I think that's incredibly useful. And that's sort of the core teaching when I consume all of your content. It's to figure out what those values are. So how do we do that?
Yeah.
How do we get clear on that?
Well, first, every human being, regardless of culture, age, or gender spectrum, lives moment by moment by a set of priorities, set of values, things that are most to least important in life. Every perception, every decision, every action that underlies their behavior is an expression of their values. And whatever is highest on their value hierarchy, they're spontaneously inspired from within, intrinsically, to do. And whatever is lower on their values, they extrinsically need motivation, incentive, or something to push them from the outside. So you're going to excel and be more effective and efficient and be more fluidic and graceful if you are living congruently with what you value most. That's why the principle, if you don't fill your day with high priority actions that inspire you, your day fills up with low priority distractions that don't. And you raise your self-worth when you live by the highest values, and you lower it when you're in lower. You create symptomatology, and blood glucose and oxygen goes down to the amygdala if you're living by lower values, which is where our survival mode is. And if we live in our highest values, it goes into the executive center where we have self-governance and mastery. And I could go on with that. I just did a presentation yesterday on the executive functions of the prefrontal cortex, and I elaborated on it until their head was smoking, I think. But I'm a firm believer that prioritization is one of the keys of mastery. And people who do prioritize their life and master the skill of delegating everything other than what they're inspired to do can live an inspired life. But if you're trapped and you haven't been willing to let go of things that weigh you down, you hold yourself back and you scatter yourself and then you devalue yourself. So I've now applied that in each of the 7 areas of life. A human being has a pulvinar nuclei in the thalamus, which is a gating and filtering center of sensory information going into the cortex. So that means that anything that is high on your value, the very highest, we extract and literally filter our physical, spiritual reality through that value system. And that's why, you will, if you're a mother and you have 3 kids under the age of 5 and you're 35 years old and your focus and highest value is mothering and taking care of beautiful children. If you go to a mall, you're going to spot children's items, children's health items, education items, entertainment items, clothes, etc., that deal with children. You're not going to notice business things, sports things. You're going to see children's things. But if you're an entrepreneur and your highest value is running a company, you're going to see business entrepreneurial material in that mall. You're not going to see children's stuff. So you filter your reality according to the hierarchy of your values, and you learn and absorb and apply information most effectively when you can perceive that whatever you're perceiving is helping you fulfill that highest value. So the quality of your life is based on the quality of the question you ask. If you ask a question, how specifically is the information that I'm studying, let's say, helping me fulfill what is deeply most important to me and meaningful to me and what inspires me? If you can make links in the brain neuroplastically and remyelinate the brain by Hebbian rule, you can liberate yourself with a tremendous amount of energy, and you will literally awaken a photographic, autographic mind. And your conscious information is expanded, your focal fixation point is expanded, your ability to absorb and apply that information goes up. And anytime you're studying something, even information that was unconsciously given in, surfaces the second you link that information to what is valuable. I've proven that in studying unconscious learning. And so just in the learning and the waking up genius capacities and absorbing information, if we link whatever it is to the highest value, we engage and we empower our learning capacities and wake up genius and creativity. Genius and creativity emerges and maximizes when we're pursuing challenges of solving problems for humanity in a way that is serving what is most important to us. So we can't wait to get up in the morning and be of service, and people can't wait to get that service because it's meeting a need. And that's where genius creativity occur. In the business world, nobody goes to work for the sake of a company. They go to work to fulfill what they value most. And so if they can perceive that their job description and duties and responsibilities and the vision, mission, and primary objectives of the company are helping them fulfill their highest values, they'll be engaged. They won't need micromanagement. They are not going to need breaks. They'll just be inspired to go to work and do what they love doing. And so I have developed whole systems on how to maximize engagement, to reduce the probability of health issues and, wanting to get away and take breaks and all that and stuff, and entitlement, and show them how to empower their career. So they're absolutely a career orientation, not just a job that they're having to do. If you hear people say, I've got to, I must, I should, I ought to, I suppose to, I have to, I need to go to work, they're not engaged. But when they say, I love it, this is what I've dreamed about, this is what I love doing, that's totally creatable. I've proven that, and I can take anybody in a job and I can turn it into that type of state by asking questions and holding them accountable to answer those questions and make neuroplastic links into the cortex. So we can take that, and when we communicate with people and managing people or lead people, if we communicate in their values, what we value most in their values and respect them, we get them and get them more engaged. And we don't have to be an autocrat and end up with a union counterbalancing the autocrat. We actually have an empowered leadership that's where people are doing what they love to do, and there's less management, less micromanagement, kind of like Buffett does with all the people running his company, stays out of it because they're able to do their job and they love it, and they're doing it because they love to, not because they have to. And then when it comes to business finances, your hierarchy of values will dictate your financial destiny. And if you have a higher value on buying consumables that depreciate than you do buying assets that appreciate, you're going to be working your life for money as a slave instead of having it work for you as a master. And so I have ways of changing the value hierarchy so we can increase the probability of building wealth, because otherwise money will circulate through the economy from those who value it least to those who value it most. If you don't have a value on wealth building and you have a value on immediate gratifying consumables, then you're going to have your life be run by consumables and fill up all your space with a bunch of junk instead of actually going out and doing something that contributes, that makes money. You'll be living vicariously through other people's brands instead of building a brand that draws in opportunities into your life. And when it comes to relationship, nobody wants to be told what to be or told what to do. They want to be loved and appreciated who they are. And their identity, their ontological identity, is an expression of what they value most. And so if you can communicate what you value most in terms of what they value most, and they feel that you're helping them fulfill what's important to them, they go into their executive center and they end up functioning with more true, fair exchange communications, a dialogue instead of alternating monologues. And they are appreciative and they want to be around you. They will call you charismatic because you care enough to respect them to communicate in what they value most. And when it comes to society, the same thing, except now it's on a scaled positioning where you're actually working and learning and respecting the people you're going to lead by doing what you can to help other people get what they want to get in life, so you get what you want to get in life. Zig Ziglar taught me that when I was young, 20 or so, and I think that that's a great principle. So the leadership is being clear on your vision and mission of what you want to dedicate to and communicating effectively in terms of other people's values. And when you do that, when you live by your highest values, the blood glucose and oxygen goes into the forebrain. The executive center, which is underneath the medial prefrontal cortex, is right in front of the lamina terminalis and right in front of the hypothalamus and pituitary gland. And it's actually correlated to maintaining homeostasis to the autonomics, which then manages epigenetics, which then helps the immune system regulate its surveillance. I mean, I could go a full week on just the physiological impact of living congruently by your highest value on just physiology. And you get the most wellness quotient. When you're doing what you love and are inspired and living by priority, your wellness quotient goes way up. You have eustress, not distress. Your telomeres grow. You expand your space and time horizons. You expand your contribution and your love for work. It's just amazing. And of course, that's an inspired life. And I think spirituality is not subordinating to some anthropomorphic deity that's going to rescue from your fears, but it's realizing that the divine nature inside you, being inspired and living with equanimity within and equity with other people and contributing vastly on a scale that inspires you, that makes a difference and leaving a mark and a legacy of contribution, to me is a great spiritual contribution. Not subordinating to someone of the past. It's about being present in the moment of contribution and realizing your potential and exemplifying, as Einstein said, what that is as a human being to planet Earth. And so I believe that all those areas can be empowered. I love helping people, one or two or all the above, waking those up and gathering information and showing them how to do that. That's just the most inspiring thing I get to do.
Absolutely fascinating. Fascinating. I appreciate you breaking that down. And I guess the two paths that I would like to go down, and it's up to you to choose which one you'd like to tackle first. I have sort of two main questions out of that. One would be, how can you identify your values? And then two would be, how can you potentially change your values if they're not in line with, for example, wealth and assets that appreciate versus depreciate, or potentially the career that's actually going to benefit you? So how do you identify, and then how do you change if they're not in line?
Well, I got aware of how significant values are many years ago. I've been teaching value applications for 43, almost 44 years. So I was probably in my early 20s when I started to realize the significance of those. But when you ask somebody what their values are, I can guarantee you, because I've done it so many thousands of times, that they will tell you injected values of outer authorities. Their mothers, their fathers, their preachers, their teachers, their conventions, traditions, and mores of the social collective that they are part of the herd of, will infiltrate and inculcate into their consciousness, and they will tell you things that have nothing to do with what their life demonstrates. They'll say peace and this and that and honesty and all these things. They don't realize anything about human behavior, so they just say what they think it's supposed to be. Many times, even to themselves, they're not even aware. You ask the average person how many want to be financially independent, they'll all put their hands up, but their life doesn't demonstrate that. Only 1% or less demonstrate that. The rest of them are in debt. So I'm not interested in what people say. I'm interested in what they live and what their life demonstrates. And because their perception, decisions, and actions are governed there. So I had to come up with ways of determining values that went through that filter. And one of the most significant one was space, proxemics. Every human being, if you give a child, even in a crib, an item, if they value it and it's intriguing to them and they value it, they will put it in their mouth, taste it, they'll play with it, look at it, they'll explore it, and they'll keep it next to them. And if you try to take it away, they'll cry or do something and they'll hold on to it. Because anything that's valuable goes proximal and they keep close to them. You give a woman a diamond ring, it usually stays close to them, right? And distance is something they push away. So if you give a child something it doesn't want, it'll kick and scream and whatever and push it out. So even a child at a young age already has a set of values. In fact, values are already occurring in the zygote, the very first stage of first mitotic division from the sperm and the egg uniting. Values are already being developing in cells. But by the time we're born, we already have our set of values and we're developing them as we go and involving them. But first thing I do is look at space, how we feel our space most. What are the three most significant, most consistent items that we keep in our personal or intimate space? Personal is 4 feet, intimate's 1.5 feet around us in proxemics. And we get an idea of what we actually fill our space with. And this tells us what we value. Like, I'm sure that you're probably like me a bit. You probably have a computer in front of you a lot. And my computer is where I research, write, travel through Zoom, and teach. Mm-hmm. So my computer is probably the most significant thing. If a fire was to break out and they said I couldn't take I was on a plane or my ship or whatever, they said, you can't take that. I'd hide it in there and, hide it with me because my computer.
It's your life. It's your life. That's the closest thing to you. Yeah.
Yeah. So and not that I wouldn't grab my kids first, but I'd grab my kids with my computer.
Yeah.
But it depends. If they're teenagers, you might get the computer first. But anyway, I'm joking. But space is number one. The next one is time. You make time, find time, spend time, and create time for things that are really valuable to you. You run out of time and don't want to take time. And I don't have time right now. I can't do that on things that aren't. And the more valuable it is, you make time for. I mean, if all of a sudden, I'm just going to pick a name. If Bill Gates or maybe Jeff Bezos or Richard Branson or somebody that's an icon in the business world, if all of a sudden they called and said, I can do an interview right this minute, you'd say probably, John, I gotta go. I got this opportunity. I'll call you. We'll reschedule this because you get an opportunity, you grab it.
Yeah.
So you would make time, find time, spend time on something that's very, very valuable to you. And so I look at how you fill your space most, top 3 things, how you spend your time most, top 3 things. And I don't want to go and write. You're not here to write what you wish it would be or hope it would be or what it used to be. You write down what your life demonstrates. Your life demonstrates your values. That's what's so crucial, to look carefully at what you're objectively doing. If I videotape you from a hovering, thing above you, looking down on you, and I watched your life, it would tell me what you're doing. And that tells me, and watching that over a period of months and months and months, I can see what your pattern is. And I'm looking for that because that tells me what's valuable. The third one is what energizes you. Whenever you're doing something that's high in your value, your energy goes up. And whenever you do, and your mitochondria go up, the mitochondria actually spit out that energy and, do phosphorylation and oxidation much more efficiently when you're doing something high in your values. That's been demonstrated. And then if you go down into lower values, your energy goes down. If all of a sudden somebody said, look, I want you to go and repair your car, there's no mechanics and you got to go out and do your car, you're going to procrastinate, hesitate, frustrate doing that. And you're going to go, oh crap, you're going to fall asleep probably. Your reticular activating system is going to shut down. But if somebody says, look, I want you to interview Jeff Bezos today, can you do that? even if you didn't get any sleep, you would rally because you automatically would get that reticular activating system going. So what energizes you, and what do you always have energy for? And what is it that when you do it, you got more energy than when you started? That's a sign of a high value. And by the way, when you do the space, time, and energy, you're going to find that those patterns are the same. They're going to see the same thing repeating if you're honest. I've done it thousands and thousands of times. The fourth one is money. You find money, make money, spend money, get money for things that are valuable to you. If I said to you right now, do you have a $10 million in your pocket? You go, not, I may have to go and get that and work, do something to get my $10 million. But if I said, okay, I've got a guaranteed return, a 10-to-1 return in 30 days.
You'll
if you
find
give
that
me 10 million, I'll get you 100 million. You would find a way of getting $10 million. You'd call all your friends, you do whatever it takes to do it. So when you really, really, really value something, you find money for it. That's what's amazing. When people say, I can't afford things, it means somebody hasn't sold it to them in a way where they feel their values are being met. That's all. There's no lack of money on this planet to any human being when they really have a value on something. So how you spend your money and where is that money going? If you look at the disbursement sheets, it tells you. If it mostly goes to a house, then obviously a house and whatever that represents to you is. And then you look at what does it really represent? Just like what do you fill your space with? What's its dominant use? Because if I said my computer, well, the computer's not valuable. It's what you're able to do with it. So what's the utility of it? What's the purpose of that item? And the same thing for what you spend your money on. What exactly are you doing with that money? What are you trying to accomplish with that? That tells you what the value is. The fifth one is where are you most organized and ordered? Knowledge is organized in my mind. I have a vast amount of knowledge, gathered from all the reading and watching YouTubes and stuff. So that's all organized on my computer and in my head. And wherever you have the most order and organization, it tells you what you value. And the next one is where you're most disciplined and reliable. In other words, you can rely on me to be teaching, you can rely on me to be researching and writing, but you can't rely on me to socialize at a party or go to a social event or, I do work out once a week. But
I just want to take a second and thank the sponsor of today's episode, HubSpot. Now, while you're listening to this podcast, you're probably doing something else too. Mastering the art of working out, shaving like no one's watching. We get it. When you're having conversations with your customers, the same is probably true for them. They're IMing their teams, mentally planning date nights. So growing conversations beyond that moment can be challenging. HubSpot helps you go beyond the moment by connecting you and your teams so you can access the exact same data and see the full customer picture. What motivates them, what their expectations are, and how you can blow them out of the water. With powerful tools that connect marketing, sales, ops, and service, HubSpot's powerful CRM platform powers you and your teams to transform customer moments into extraordinary customer experiences. Learn how HubSpot can help your business grow better at HubSpot.com. Or do your own tech support. That's not a priority. That's something that you don't want to take that on.
I haven't cooked since I was 24. I haven't driven a car in 32 years. I delegate everything that's low on my values. I even joke with my girlfriend, said, look, I'm not that great at lovemaking. If I was to get George Clooney or Gerard Butler or, Brad Pitt or, something like that. If I was to get them to make love with you on my behalf, would you still love me? Every single time my girlfriend says yes, every time. So, I delegate everything. I'm joking about that. I don't delegate that.
I know.
But I can delegate it. My girlfriend's pretty hot. She's a cool one. I'm not going to delegate that one. I've been stingy on that one.
Good.
But I delegate that. So you look at where you spend your money, you look at where you're ordered, and you look at where you're most disciplined. And I'm very disciplined when it comes to research and teaching. I do it every single day. Now, the next one is, what are you thinking about? What are you visualizing? And what are you internally dialoguing? Frontal and parietal cortex, occipital cortex, temporal cortex. What are you visually, auditorily, what are you thinking about, visualizing, and affirming inside about how you want your life that shows evidence coming true? So I've said since I was 17 that I want to travel the world and be a great teacher on the planet and study the philosophy and the sciences and be, leave a mark in teaching. And so that's my internal dialogue. That's my vision. I actually have a painting. I could show you a painting of me standing in front of 1 million people with every iconic building around the world in the background. That a really amazing painting, 5 by 4 foot. The guy painted with 1 million people there. me speaking to him. So I have a visual image of that. I've got an internal dialogue that I've got that, hundreds and hundreds of internal dialogues. And I think about it daily. And so I look at what I think and visualize and affirm every single day that is showing evidence of coming true about what I want in life, not my fantasies. I thought about being an international sex symbol, but there's zero evidence of that one. So I can't put that down. That's a zero evidence. But if I look at what I do have evidence of, it's teaching. And then I go and then I look at the next one. What do I want to keep bringing conversations to? When I want to talk to people, what do I lead the conversation to? People come up to you and said, how's your kids? How's your business? How's your health? How's your golf game? They always want to talk about what's in their highest values. So I look at what you want to converse most consistently with people when you can spontaneously socialize. And then I look at what it is that inspires you and brings tears to your eyes and what's common to the people who you've been absolutely inspired to watch and interact with. And then I look at what are the most consistent goals that you have that's persistent, consistent, that you're achieving and you're getting to come into reality. And then I look at what you spontaneously want to learn, study, read about, watch on YouTube, and absorb and information-wise. What's the most common thing you want to learn? And if you look and answer the 3 answers for all those 13 questions, I guarantee a pattern will emerge and you'll sit there and go, whoa, now I know what I'm really committed to, not what I fantasize about. And the degree of those inconsistency are setting real goals with real times, realistic expectations versus setting unrealistic goals that are unmet that lead to frustration. So finding out what that is and summarizing that and determining the top values, to me, is like a starting point in mastery of life.
The last point that I wanted to pull out of you is we've now established how we understand what our values are. So the follow-up is, how do we change those values if we know they're not serving us?
Well, there's no such thing as values that don't serve you. But what most people do is, and I want everybody to inculcate this, you don't make mistakes in your own values. You only think you make a mistake when you compare your actions to some outer authority's values that you've subordinated to. And you only think other people make a mistake in your business when you project your values onto them and expect them to live in your values. They're not going to. Futility is a byproduct of expecting others to live in your values or you expecting you to live in other people's values. That's why the mastery of hiring people is screening people according to what their values are and finding out whether the job description really matches their values. Because if there is, you're going to have a high engagement level and you don't need to micromanage them and you don't have to judge them because they're just going to get the job done. And they're probably going to do it more effectively than you could do. But when you hire somebody that's not congruent with that, you're going to think they're making mistakes all the time. You're going to think they're disobedient, but that's because you're righteously projecting your values onto them and they're supposed to read your mind and expect to live in your values, and nobody can. That's why the idea of a cultural value system is murky and not really well educated out there. So you want to make sure that when you're filtering and you're looking and hiring people, that you basically get somebody that really is congruent with the job description. And that you can do. And I've got a whole science for that on how to do that. That's just amazing. And a lot of companies using it. So that's one thing. Once you identify the values, then to change them now, first you find out what it is, because you sometimes want to change your values when you're expecting to live in somebody else's life. Envy is ignorance and imitation is suicide, as said Emerson. But if you do, let's say you're 50 years old, you've raised beautiful children, you've had a great family and everything else, and you realize, oh, empty nest syndrome. Time for me to run a business or grow my wealth because, oh my God, I don't have any money saved. I get it all to the kids, take care of their college, take care of this, lived meager for the sake of my kids. Now I'm going to get Alzheimer's condition and pretend like I don't know their names so I can put some focus on what I want to do. That's a joke. But if you want to change a value system, you identify the action steps that are proven to master that area. Success leaves clues. Find out the action steps that prove to get a result. And now you take those action steps and then you stack up and you use operant conditioning from Skinner or Pavlov, conditioned reflexes, and you ask the question, how specifically is doing those actions helping me fulfill what I value most? And how does it help me spiritually, mentally, career, financial, family, social, and physical? So you empower all areas of your life. And if you ask that question and answer that question and don't say, I don't know, I can't find it, but answer it, be accountable, you'll blow your mind. If you stack up enough advantages over the disadvantages, once the advantages outweigh the advantages of what you're doing currently, your brain will neuroplastically remodel itself and go in that direction with stimulus responses. You'll start doing that action. But it's got to be enough where it overrides that because of Hebbian rule in neurology, that it basically has to, the oligodendrocytes in the brain come on and myelinate all the cells, and they myelinate a new pathway. It's like blazing a new trail if you add enough benefits to it. So you go in there and stack it up until you can see a change in behavior. So you just keep doing it. I tell people 200 benefits until the brain is completely rewired in a direction where you now have stimulus and you now save your money, you now invest your money, you're now doing things. And then you look at all those things that are proven to work. And I've helped people that have never been able to save money or never be able to keep any money and change that. And I've seen that done in a 200 answer response. I've seen that done as quick as a day. I've seen some people do it in less than a day, but usually about a day's work of effort. And all of a sudden they're now noticing in the mall different things, and they're now taking different actions, because your decisions are based on whatever you believe will give you the greatest advantage or disadvantage at any moment in time, according to what you're valuing. So you can shift the values, and I could remodel the values to move in directions that you want. If you want more health, or you want more wealth, or you want more business savvy, or whatever it may be, it can be. But I usually don't start there. I start with first identifying what the values are, so they quit living in a fantasy of who they are and get grounded. They may not have to have a desire to change anything. They may just finally realize, hey, I'm pretty magnificent the way I am. I just never saw that because I've been comparing myself to others.
I think that the most interesting thing about you as an individual, before we go into some of these topics that I want to dive deep into and unpack, you as an individual are an exceptional individual. And the reason why I say that is because when I do even research for this podcast, a lot of the people that I speak to, they're experts in one particular topic. And you hear them enough and they repeat a lot of the same things on maybe 1, 2, 3 different topics. The one thing that I find is fascinating about you, and I think this is hopefully a useful skill that the audience can pick up on if they can dive into your research process, your ability to assimilate knowledge on a variety of different topics and understand it, and then provide context to it. So you are I don't want to say jack of all trades, but you do so many different things, and you help people in so many different lanes between mindset and psychology and business, but everything you teach is valuable. So for you, tell us about your learning process and how you go about becoming an expert in so many different fields that have some similarities, but ultimately are not in the same lane. Because I think that's what's the most impressive thing when I look at your body of work.
Well, thank you for seeing that. When I was 18 years old, I had a number of objectives that I went out for. And a gentleman, when I was 17, mentioned the word universal laws. And that sounded kind of cool. And at age 18, I watched David Carradine on Kung Fu, and he talked about his Solan master. And I thought, wow, I'd like to be a master. And those two things stuck in my mind. I also was told by the gentleman when I was 17 about waking up genius. So I had a dream at 17 and then again at 18 to want to master my life and to study universal laws. So I went in the dictionary and I said, what's a universal law? And that led me to natural laws by Aristotle. That led me to the study of the logos, which was the study of reason in the universe. And then I realized that that was the source of all the ologies you could study. So it could be any discipline that an individual could study was under that category. And so what I did, I went through the dictionary and encyclopedia and looked for every known ology, every discipline a person could study. Because I figured if I was going to build a body of knowledge, I would want to have a foundation of the most consistent principles that were found throughout the different disciplines. So I made a list of all the different disciplines and ologies you could study. I still have that list on my computer today. And I made a commitment to read 100 books in each one. So I just figured I'm going to study these things and I'm going to read, you know, I'm going to try to go to the original thinker who is the founder of that discipline. So I want to study, magnetism. I study Gilbert. If I want to study a different field, I go to the founder of that field. Astronomy, I may go back to Anaximander, the Greek philosopher, for instance. And I started to devour as much information because I figured that an average PhD would read about 100 books. And if you start stacking up PhDs, you'd end up with 100 books in each field and they'd overlap after a while. So there's a lot of duplication. So that was the dream. I wanted to do it because I wanted to have a body knowledge that was solid and I wanted to have polymathic understanding. I wanted to be an autodidactic polymath. And that really was inspired by Rene Descartes when he was reading the European philosophers of the Western world. There was a textbook that had it, and he mentioned that he wanted to be a man of letters and he wanted to have a universal knowledge and stuff. Encyclopedists, say some people called him. And I made a commitment to write an encyclopedia. A guy named Diderot wrote an encyclopedia with another fellow that took 20 years to do. And so I decided I was going to do that and work 30 pages a day on this massive piece of work that I wanted to do so I could have a better knowledge. I started reading 8 complete sets of encyclopedias from cover to cover to try to get a better understanding of this. But I want to find the most universal laws to build a body of knowledge with. That was the original objective. And so now, after 30,662 books, because I keep records of them, I have been doing that. And people go, well, that's insane. Why would you want to do that? And, one specialty is, sufficient. And I was told all the way through this time, so you got to specialize, I said, well, okay. But if I specialize and I work 100 times more than the other person, I can do 100 of those. So when I was in the health profession, I studied medicine, I studied dentistry, I studied chiropractic, I studied osteopathy, I studied astronomy, I studied cancer and oncology, I did lectures on oncology, I did lectures on this. I actually spoke to dentists and did conferences for dentists all the way up to the American Dental Association when I was 24. And I spoke at Rice University and University of Houston on astronomy, and I spoke on oncology to MD Anderson Hospital conferences. And people thought that this is a freak, this is a weird character, but he's got something to say. And so this has been my dream. And I kept asking, how do I more effectively and efficiently retain information and absorb information? And I experimented with all different types of things, from speed reading and photo reading and all kind of things to try to accelerate that. And I averaged in my 20s around 4 to 7 books a day on average, about 19 to 20, 25 books a week. And I started accumulating this body of knowledge. And I wanted to find, I linked everything I studied to the evolution of human consciousness, the maximizing human awareness and potential. And so if I was studying mineralogy under geology, I'd study geology. And then I would go into the minerals and I'd look at the microorganisms that are involved in the transformation of minerals. I looked at the minerals as chelators inside the enzymes, inside the physiology, to look at the metabolic pathways. And so people go, why are you studying geology? I said, because your energy is going to be based on mitochondria, which are bacteria. And many of them originate as lithophiles and extremophiles. And so I want to know how they metabolized and what are the mechanisms of metabolism to grow to maximize energy. So studying that field was part of one common thing, maximizing the evolution of human consciousness, maximizing awareness potential, and helping people master their lives and evolving consciousness. And so anything, whether I'm studying astronomy, now I'm studying the origins, nucleosynthesis, from the Big Bang nucleosynthesis to stellar nucleosynthesis to supernova nucleosynthesis, to create atoms that are involved in building the body, and studying physiology of how those things work and study. So I broke the body down. I took gross anatomy down until I could take it to the quantum level. And I'm writing right now a textbook on physics. Now I'm about to present in November. So I'm constantly trying to take it from the macro to the micro and in between to study the most universal laws I could, to build a body of knowledge that I could, when I deliver something, I can rely on it. So that's been my dream since I was 17, 18. And I'm just as inspired 50 years later today as I was then to expand my body of knowledge. And so people think I'm kind of a weirdo. My girlfriend calls me a freak. I just got introduced. I spoke at Lockdown University from the lady who heads up the Guggenheim Museum the other day. One of the guest speakers, the keynote speakers, and they introduced me as, you're about to listen to a freak.
Listen, I
That
think
was my intro, the freak.
that's not a good intro. First, not a good intro, but I appreciate that what you've done is incredible and probably uncomfortable for a lot of people too. To even like look at, right? Like that's not a comfortable path to accumulate knowledge for a lot of people that say, well, listen, I want to become a specialist in my field. I don't even read like, 100 books in that particular topic, let alone 30 plus thousand. So it is, but it just goes to show you that there is no necessary, well, maybe there are better ways to assimilate knowledge, and maybe you found tricks to be able to go into a book and get the most possible out of it in the shortest period of time. But I mean, ultimately, there are no quick hacks to level up your intelligence. Really, I mean, it's been 50 years of reading, researching, finding new bodies of work to go into, right?
Yes, it's never ending. I love it. Something happened to me when I was 24. Well, when I was 23, I started into professional college, and the very first day there was a neurology class, and there's a mention of Penfield's homunculus, which is a little image of a creature that shows the different percentages of distribution of neurons to the representing the different parts of the brain and the sensory motor expression. And when I thought I saw the stomatic gnathic system of the jaw was the most highly represented part of the brain, and I thought, well, if I'm going to specialize in neurology and joints and the body and stuff and orthopedics and things, I'm going to study that. So I went to the library and I got everything on the stomatic gnathic system, which is the TMJ, temporal mandibular joint. And there was very little. And so I went over to the University of Texas Dental School, and I went to their library and started to devour every book that was there. And I went to the dean and I said, if I was to specialize in TMJ, what would be in my curriculum and what books and what everything I would do? He said, well, that's all listed down in the bookstore. Go find it and stuff. He wasn't much help, but so I then devoured it. And I read like 400 books on that field. And I got the opportunity to lecture at a little dental study group after meeting this guy at a party. He said, why don't you come and speak about what you know on this thing? And at the end of it, they said, well, that was 3 hours of deep dive. You got any more? And I said, I got plenty. And the TMJ was kind of a new field at the time. There was only Harold Gelb and Nathan Shore and John Baldwin and a few other people that were leading the field. And I got to meet all these guys. I mean, I got to break bread with these guys. And all of a sudden he goes, we'd like to have you come back. And so for 10 months, every single week, I was doing a presentation to these dentists. And one of them said, we got a Southwest Craniomandibular Society we'd like you to speak to. Can you come and present there? And I said, yeah. So I got this opportunity. And then after one guy came from there, and he says, well, I got the Tri-County Dental Association conference. We'd like to have a guest speaker. Great. I mean, I'm 24 years old. I'm not even a doctor yet, but I'm hanging it. I'm going for it, and I love it. And then I was at this conference, the Tri-County Association, and I was supposed to speak for 30 minutes right after lunch. And they got up and introduced and said, well, we got this young man. He's not a doctor or anything like that. He's not a dentist or anything else, but he's going to do a special presentation. And people go, what? Who the hell is this guy? And people started to walk out. I had like a mass exodus of people going, why were we going to sit? We're going to go out and just have some coffee. This is ridiculous. And the guy gets back up there and he introduces me again. He says, well, hold on a minute. My introduction wasn't sufficient. Harold Gelb, as you know, out of New York, and Nathan Shore, as you know, has written textbook on the field. And John Baldwin right here in Houston has said they learned more from this young character than they've learned from their professors. And they said they were the one that recommended him. And so, really? So they all stood by the door.
That's funny.
All these guys are standing by the door with their teams. And I start speaking, and they started to come back and sit down after a while because I started talking about the brain.
It started to be interesting.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, three of the speakers for the afternoon gave up their time and let me speak for 4 hours. I got 4 hour presentation,
Wow.
Now, here's what was cool. There's the best part. During the presentation, there was a real heckling guy, real skeptic guy, and he just really was upset that, how dare you let a guy that's not a doctor in our field be a speaker? And he threw out a challenging question, and out of the blue, mysteriously, a photographic image of Gray's Anatomy, the answer that I get, to give him an answer, I saw this page and I started to share it and read the page as if it was sitting in front of my eyes. I started reading on this page, the top of the thing, under this caption, I started reading this thing. And 75, I guess, pieces of paper from all the different attendees, they started throwing paper at this guy and said, let the guy speak, quit hassling him. And when I did that, I went, I didn't know I knew that. And then I learned something really cool about speed reading. There's an explicit memory and an implicit memory. And explicit memory is what you remember what you read. And there's an implicit stuff that went into your brain. You didn't remember it. But once somebody asks you a question that's highly informative and important, it comes out. And I learned a whole nother thing about learning that I didn't know before, that I hadn't read anywhere, that every human being has a set of priorities, a set of values in their life. And whatever's highest on their value is an intrinsic value. And whatever's low is becomes more extrinsic. The things that are lower, you need motivation to get you to do, but the things highest is spontaneously inspired to do it. That once you make a link between the knowledge you've absorbed through your senses and that highest value, it comes to the conscious. It goes from implicit to explicit. And I didn't know I knew things. So then after that, I said, okay, I don't need to remember while I'm reading. I just need to get my eyes exposed to the page. And then when I need it and it's important to me, it'll come to the surface. And that was a big turning point at age 24 on accelerating. So I started reading. One day I read 11,000 pages of material just to find out what I was capable of doing. And then I used to do presentations that were nothing but Q&A just to find out, ask questions. I had no idea what I was going to get involved in. I'd push myself to go on to conferences and talks and things that I had really read about it, but didn't know what I knew. And boom, all this information would come out when I needed it. And that was a major breakthrough. And then I developed a way of helping people absorb information, retain information, apply it, and use it creatively. And started teaching kids this and, other people. I've gone into colleges and universities and high schools and stuff to help people absorb information. So that was really a turning point at 24. So I didn't have any anxiety about learning and didn't really worry about it. And people go, why are you doing it? I said, because I want to know. I'm like the man who wants to know. That's all. I just love learning. And whether I get to use it immediately or not, I know it's there when I need it.
And over the years now, you've discovered that when you were 24, what is the strategy to, because I'm sure you figured this out as well, improve the recall of that subconscious information that you've assimilated or read? Because you mentioned one thing interesting that was interesting. If that information aligns with your highest values, it's easy to recall almost instantaneously, even if you haven't remembered it. The second you close the book, it's going to come back at some point in time and you're going to be able to pull it up. But there must be some strategies that you use now to purposefully pull it up so that even if you're not in a high stress situation, you can still get that information out of you.
I found out a really interesting principle. And this, a couple of Nobel Prizes came out of this on the place cells and grid cells in the hippocampus and entorhinal complex of the brain, and how we sort social information and other information. And I found out that since you have a sensory and a motor system, if you take in information and disseminate that information spontaneously, your retention goes up. So the faster you give out what you learned, the higher the retention. In other words, the more you add space and time to your mind, the more distorted subjectively the information, and the more you extract out space and time in your mind, become really present and disseminate the information to somebody just after you got it. The faster that is, the greater and more longevity the retention. So once I learned that at 23, I was learning part of that, but 24, I really got that. I started to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning. I used to sleep 4 hours a day for 35 years. I did that. And I get up at 2 o'clock in the morning. I would do yoga and meditation and just visualize my day and what I'm intending to accomplish, and started reading. So I would have stacks of books with a sheet of paper on it for the day. I'd pre-think them for that way I could advertise my presentations for the night. And I would speed read 4 to 7 books on average in the morning in a 4-hour period, go jogging, run it through my mind as I'm jogging, come back, go to my classes. Some of the classes I got to place out of, and some of them I got to teach, which was great. That helped me retain more information. And then I go to clinic, and then I come back, and then I would start teaching at 7 to 10 p.m. every single night. And there was always students there. I made my first $100,000 as a student when I was 23, doing classes every night, 7 nights a week. But what they didn't realize is I was doing the classes on what I read that morning to make sure that I didn't go to bed without sharing what I just learned. And I found that accelerated my learning capacities vastly. And so I would buy the books, 40 to 70 books a week on average, and put them in the thing and stack them up and pre-think them out and think the topics, put the topics out there, advertise the topics, and then organize those books by the day throughout the week, and then share that information each night, and engage in questions, as much questions to bring it out of me. So I purposely structured it where I would maximize my learning. And most people were interested in passing tests. I never even never thought about tests. The tests were not my thing, because tests, I always say, are insignificant. In fact, when I was studying neurology, I read way more books than what were required. There's like, you had this textbook, right? Well, I read like 50 books by the time I took that class. And so the teacher gave out these questions, and you had A or B or C and 2 of the above and 3 of the above, that kind of questions. And I wrote in answers that weren't on the question, that weren't unlisted, and crossed out things and answered according to what I knew about neurology at the time. And the teacher failed me. He failed me. And I walked into him with 49 books on neurology, and I walked into his office. I said, "How dare you fail me? How could you fail me?" He said, "You can't answer a test by crossing out the answers and throwing in another answer and doing it. You can't play tricks like that on a test." And I said, "I can too." And I said, "Who are you as the authority to tell me I can't?" And I brought in all the authorities and showed them every one of the answers that I did on the neurology text. And he goes, "You read all these books?" I said, "Yeah, and they're all underlined. And here's my reference to why I put it in there and why you were outdated on some of this." And he goes, "You're out of my class. You're placed out. I can't have you in my class. This is ridiculous." And I said, "Well, I don't want to be out of the class. I want to be in the class because I'm going to learn something. But at the same time, I'm serious about neurology. So I don't want to just read one textbook. That's not enough. That's just an opinion. I want to get a body of knowledge." He says, "That's insane. I mean, you're a freak." And I said, "But I came here to learn. I didn't come here to pass a test." So 3 weeks later, he got in trouble because he had a little fling with one of the ladies at the school, and he got suspended for a month. And he said, "John, can you take over my class?"
Do you think
So
that
I got to teach.
No, I was gonna say, that's, first of all, that's incredible. I want to also understand. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You keep going with your story, but I also want to understand, when you look at the way that you've learned over your career versus the way people learn now, which is audibles, podcasts, YouTube videos, for example. Which way do you think is a more permanent way of taking knowledge, implanting it in your brain, and making sure that it's with you for the long term? Because now you put out a lot of educational videos and content too, and you can still go through your story. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm just curious if you see an issue with the way that people try to almost conveniently learn new things in terms of effectiveness.
Well, that's a good question. I studied with Bander and Grinder in 1978-9 NLP, and in those days you had this this idea that you had visual-oriented, auditory, and kinesthetic-oriented learning process and accessing cues and stuff. And I found out that those are wounds that are creating that. We're all Gestalt, but if we have a wound in our life that's emotional, we've associated pain with visual, we've seen something visually as painful, we'll shut down that learning accessing system, and we'll go into kinesthetic, or we'll go into a different system. And I developed later systems on how to dissolve those wounds so you could access information Gestalt-wise through all of them, and more integrative knowledge. But I noticed that I did them all. I that's in fact what made me, what Bandler was interested. I was at a seminar and asked him a question, and then confronted him on the answer because it was a bogus answer. And he said, how did you get, I mean, you're processing, he's watching my eye movements, and he says, he wanted to talk to me about how I'm processing information, because he said, I'd like to duplicate that. But I found out that when I was in school, there were audio cassettes in those days, and there were video, those big video, whatever they were called, and the big ones, you know.
Yeah, that's going back a bit.
VHS, I think they called them.
Yes.
Yeah, VHS, I think.
VHS.
DVD. DVDs didn't come until the 90s or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
Or late 80s and 90s. So I had them all going. I didn't waste my time. If I was showering, I had an audio on. You know, if I would speed read and I'd still have an audio going. When I sleep at night, I had audios, and I didn't care. I used every vehicle I could, so I didn't have any wasted time. I didn't waste any time. I calculated that I could go, by the time I walked from my office to the bathroom, I could read 10 pages and come back another 10 pages. And then if I went to lunch, I could read, 40 pages and 40 pages. And then while waiting for food, I could knock it. And I figured I could knock out a book, an extra book, easily during a day, during breaks. So I was using my time efficiently, and I was also listening to audios. And if I was on a car, I couldn't read, but I would listen to audios or watch videos or something. I did whatever I could to feed my mind, because I learned that if I don't feed my mind with what I love in it, it feeds up with what I don't. Just like if you don't prioritize your day and fill your day with high priority actions, it fills up with low priority distractions. And if you don't spend your money on assets, you end up with liabilities and consumable depreciables that fill up your house with junk. So I learned about prioritization, and I use all of them. And some people will probably think that they're audio oriented or video oriented. The real authentic self is Gestalt, but they'll use that because they got wounds and stuff there. But you clear it, they'll absorb information through every vehicle, smell, taste, every one of them. So I just say use them all. I don't try to exclude any of them. I use every access you can to get feed yourself knowledge. You want to prioritize what you do. I asked people when I taught speed reading courses years ago, I asked people, write down how many books you read a month. And they'd write down 1, or they'd write down 10, or 20, or whatever it is. And I said, now, multiply how many months in a year, 12, multiply how many years you plan on living left. And they go, 40 years or 50 years. Okay, 50 years times 1 a month, that's 12 times 50, that's 60 books, 600 books. And they go, okay, so now the question is, what are you going to feed your mind? You're only going to read 600 books at the rate you're going. If you don't speed read that, you're gonna limit it to 600 books. What's the highest priority 600 books you're going to feed your mind to give yourself an advantage? Reading for a purpose is way more powerful than reading for pleasure, because that's usually an escape from an unfulfilled life. Reading with a purpose gives you competitive advantage. So what are you going to prioritize? So I teach people to prioritize what they're feeding their mind. Prioritize if you're going to watch something on videos, prioritize it. Many people just turn on a TV and allow whatever goes in there. And to me, that's unless I don't watch TV unless I'm on it.
I just want to take a second and thank the sponsor of today's episode, NordVPN. Now, if you've ever missed out on your favorite shows because it's not available in your country, or if you're trying to keep your private time private, you don't want people spying on what you're doing, well, let me introduce you to NordVPN. If you're bored of US Netflix, why not take a spin in the UK? Use NordVPN, click of a button, you can do just that. You want to watch your favorite anime? You don't have to travel to Japan. NordVPN brings it right to you with 5,000 plus server options. No show is out of reach. And of course, we all love to binge TV and Netflix, but privacy is a big deal too. NordVPN keeps your information encrypted, so you never have to worry about your IP or location getting out. They've also doubled down on keeping you safe with their new threat protection feature. Say goodbye to intrusive web ads and malware. Even if you download an infected file, threat protection kicks in and deletes it before it makes a mess of your computer. And don't forget, if you're trying NordVPN, there is literally no risk to you. They have a 30-day money-back guarantee. Give it a try. If you like it, great. If you don't, they'll issue you a refund. You can pretend it never happened. They gave a special discount for Success Story podcast listeners. They gave a special offer. So go to my link at nordvpn.com/successstory to get your subscription started today. It's almost chaotic. Chaotic and wasteful almost. I hear what you're saying. And the follow-up question would be what you originally did, which was found the the leaders in every single ology in every single field. How do you recommend people find those leaders that produce the works that are the original works that are the 600 that they should prioritize? Who should they look for? Who are the people that you default to as like the leader in that field? What's your process for finding that person?
Well, where I live here, the guy from Google, who's the brains behind Google, I chat with him quite a bit, and he today you go on Google or you go on, Microsoft Bing or some sort of search engine or whatever, and you just look up founder of, originator of, and you get there really quick. But when the old days, before you had that, you'd sometimes have to go to encyclopedia and try to find it. Or what you do is you go to looking at the field in a library. You go to the library and look at the area, and then go to the books and look at all the references. And then the reference would lead you back to the original people. Usually in a college course, they start from the originator and they work their way forward. So I would go that route originally by going into back of books and looking at the bibliographies. But after a while, the encyclopedias say founder or father or originator of, and then I'd go geology, right? Or whatever it is. And then I'd go that way and I'd start there because I wanted to create original ideas that serve. That's been my affirmation. I create original ideas that serve humanities throughout the world. I create original ideas that serve humanities throughout the world. And so I wanted to go to people who are the originators that created original work, that created the new neologies, that founded those things, that had the courage to step out and not be, part of the herd, but be heard. And so that's why I went to those people. And I have a young man who is an 8-year-old savant. When I met him, he's now 20. He was just on the front cover of Disruptive magazine the other day. He's read 14,000 books. He's 20 years old, and he's a bright guy. He's one of my top students. And he did the same thing. I told him that when he was 8, because he was going to the bookstore, and his dad would buy him books, but he would read them by the time he would get to the checkout counter. Because I saw him read a 800-page. I took him to the Institute of Advanced Studies at Princeton, and we met with Freeman J. Dyson, who's an astrophysicist that took over Albert Einstein's position. And we went and had a dialogue for 4 hours with this 9-year-old kid and myself and Freeman, and we were discussing things. And there was a book there from a Hungarian guy on astrophysics that Freeman was just getting to start and read, who he knew. And so the kid, as we were doing it while we're waiting, read the book in 4 minutes. And then we had a discussion on that book, and Freeman just went, "Oh God."
So
what am I dealing with here?
When you say something like speed reading a book in 4 minutes, I find all of this fascinating. And funny enough, this is actually none of the stuff that I wanted to actually speak to you about, but I think that the concept of learning is probably the most fundamental thing that we can teach over to the audience. I mean, if they can understand the concept of optimized learning, then everything else will flow from that. So I think this is a good use of time. So when you even speak about reading a book in 4 minutes, to everyone listening is like, that's absurd. So maybe even explain the concept, the speed reading concept, and how to actually accomplish that so that you can still get that level of understanding from the book, and you can pull it up later on and then even teach it over and all the other tricks to make sure that that
I can't say that I pulled that off myself. This kid
no, but this kid, okay, so the kid's a savant.
Kid is,
but somewhere in between the kid and you and the rest of the world.
Yeah, I've never done a 4-minute book, not that size. Maybe I did a 10-volume series in one evening in about 4 hours. So that's about as good as I get on it. But this kid just photoed. He just turned pages. We're watching, right? And he just photos it, and then he can produce it. And it's like it's a bit freakish, but kids are savant, and there are really people out there that can do this kind of stuff. It's just like autobiographical.
How does the average person? You pick up a book, the average person, what's the concept of speed reading? How fast can they go through things so that there's still some retention if you can't just photograph pages?
Well, if you practice it, I have a friend who's in South Africa that teach people speed reading, and frankly, you can train your brain to do it. It's not impossible to do. Most people read because they're taught by phonemes. They're taught by sounds. So as fast as they can speak, as fast they can read. If you're a fast reader, it's because you're a fast speaker. I'm a fast speaker, which helped, but I also know how to do photo or visual reading. But this guy in South Africa trains people how to photo read. And Sheila also teaches people that. There's a number of people that teach that. I didn't learn that. I didn't pick that up much later. I just asked what worked and what didn't work every day. But you can move from a verbal reading to gradually a visual reading by doing some exercises. Very simple. If I was to have you move your eyes in a circle really slowly, your eyes would make jerky movements as it went around in a circle. You can't make a smooth circle. But if I put a finger in front of you and I make you follow my finger, your eyes can do a perfect circle. So a visual guide guiding your eyes has less back skips and back wanders and forward skips and forward wanders. And most forward wanders and back skips and things are due to phobias associated with words and symbols and things about the author that make you want to go back and avoid moving forward fast. And sometimes things you feel guilty in your life make you move forward. And so if you have emotions, phobias and philias or prides and shames, you're not present when you read, and your focal fixation point gets really narrow and you can't absorb information effectively. And that's why you go, well, I don't even remember what I read. But if you're inspired by it, you've linked it to the highest value, you're using a visual guide and you're getting present and you actually love the topic, your focal fixation point can grow. And you can start snapshotting symbols and then words, and then you can get a bigger vision. And just with training, you can make it where you can just snapshot a page. That's totally doable. People do it. So it's a training process. And if you have a value on doing it, you'll do it. The kid loved to learn. This kid was unique. When he was 8 months old, he was already pointing to his spelling at 8 months old, and was spelling. And it was just a phenomenal thing this kid was doing. And he still has difficulty speaking, but he can read and absorb information and consult. He consults with major consulting now at 20 years old and gets paid like $1,300 an hour to do consulting.
Okay. So I want to go into two more topics that we did not go into yet. This is fascinating. I appreciate you a lot. The two topics that you speak on that are probably the most widely viewed in your repertoire of all the content you've put out are intimidation and depression. And I think that these are interesting topics because everybody deals with them and they all experience them, and they all deal with them in different ways. So I'd like to go into both of those. So first, let's start with, and obviously these are probably topics that could take their own podcast, but for people listening, let's do like a Cole's Notes as much as possible so that they can at least get some value about if they're dealing with these feelings in their life, how can they go about better preparing themselves and handling their reality? So intimidation first. How can you deal with intimidation?
Okay, that's really quite fun. So I'll give a story first and then I'll elaborate. I had a lady who was standing up about to give a speech and she froze. And she just froze. The whole room is like waiting for her to do it. And the person that introduced her was like walking back towards the thing and going, she's just standing there. And so I took it upon myself to walk up onto the stage. And when I did, I grabbed a piece of paper on my way up and I rolled it up into a tube. And I said, you're freezing and there's an anxiety about speaking and you're freezing. And she goes, yes. I said, I'd like to help you because this is a great opportunity. And so I rolled up this tube and I said, you're not frightened of speaking in front of this group. You're frightened of speaking around in front of only certain people in this group. Let me show you. So I did this little tube and made her look through the audience at each face in the audience, one by one. It wasn't a big audience. And I said, which one of those people is the person you're intimidated by? Because you walked into a room and you spotted certain people and you immediately froze. Because if you went up to somebody and said, I want you to speak and do a presentation in front of kindergarten class, you'd have no problem.
Of course.
Pardon me, there's somebody calling the room. That wasn't anticipated.
No worries.
But if you're in front of a kindergarten class and you wouldn't have a problem. If I went and took you in front of first grade class, you wouldn't have a problem. If I went to the second grade class, probably wouldn't have a problem. But the second you get to somebody where you think they have more knowledge than you and more specialty than you now freeze. The moment you are too humble to admit what you see in them inside you, you'll freeze because you'll give them power and then you'll put them above you and you'll minimize in relative terms. And that's all public speaking fear is. It's nothing but that. So I went up there and she found this lady in the audience that was an expert, and she was talking about something and felt intimidated by this lady because she thought that lady had more knowledge than her. So I said, all right, so you perceive that that lady has more knowledge and more credibility, credentials. Great. Where do you have knowledge? I asked her, where do you have knowledge? Everybody has a unique set of values, and whatever's highest on our value, we have knowledge in. Whatever's low on a value, we have less knowledge. In other words, a guy could go and get a PhD. I met a guy in Tennessee that got a PhD on William James' life. So he studied a tiny little fraction of a human being's life and got a PhD and had more knowledge, even though he only studied a fraction of a person's life. But this lady had a whole life. She was a mature lady, had a whole life. So she has multiple PhDs worth of knowledge, but is not honoring the topics she's speaking on, not acknowledging her knowledge. She's given more power to this other lady because of the specialty. So I asked her, where does she have knowledge? And I made her stand up there. We took about 10 minutes. Where's the knowledge? Where's her knowledge? Where's her knowledge? Where's her knowledge? Until she saw equal quality and knowledge. And she looked and she got a tear in the eye. She goes, I'm not frightened by that lady now. Now, go around, and we found this other lady, and she says, she's sophisticated and she's very wealthy and she's very thing. And the topic I'm talking about is I would feel intimidated by that. I said, where's your wealth? Everybody has wealth in the area of their highest values. They have a wealth in their children. They have wealth in their social context. They have wealth financially, have wealth in business knowledge, wealth academically, wealth spiritually. Wealth is in different forms. And if you compare your form to somebody else's and think their form's better than your form, you're going to minimize yourself. So I made her go in and identify where her wealth was. And this is an education of the group. People were into it. We were working together on this. And then we had another person who had social influence. And where does she have social influence? So it took about 20 minutes to do this. When I got through and I had her own every one of those and realized that she's no longer too humble to admit what she sees in them inside herself. And she had reflective awareness where the seer, the seeing, and the seen were the same, and no longer too humble and minimizing herself to something like that. And I got a tear in each one of those in the realization of that. I said, now look out. She's scared. Any more intimidation? She goes, no. I said, thank you very much. I got off the stage and she did an amazing presentation and got a standing ovation.
Wow. So that's
intimidation.
Yeah.
Intimidation is nothing more than the assumption that somebody has something more than you in the area that you're about to present. That's it. And the second you realize you have it in your own form, not their form. If I was to compare myself to Arnold Schwarzenegger, and admire him for his diligence and his workouts and stuff like that, I'd be intimidated because I'm comparing myself to his workouts. But if I look at his diligence and his dedication, I can immediately go, I got the dedication and the diligence in my studies that he doesn't have. So we have equal in that trait. He just happens to have it in his specialty. Once I level the playing field, I'm not intimidated by it. I'm just speaking about what I know. So it's about a reflective awareness. Reflective awareness transcends exaggerations and minimizations of other people. I've developed a whole science on how to transcend that I take salespeople through, and they go, I can go to any major player and I can now do a sale because I'm no longer intimidated. But there's a science behind it, and it's basically asking quality questions to make you conscious of what's unconscious because nothing's missing in you. I always say at the level of our most authentic self, nothing's missing. At the level of our senses, we are too proud or too humble to admit what we see in others inside us. And that's where we get intimidated or we try to intimidate. And both of those are unproductive, non-sustainable, fair exchange mechanisms of communication. So I just show people how to do it. Intimidation is not that difficult to transcend.
Do you find that after somebody goes through this exercise a few times that it starts to become their de facto, their almost like their default state of approaching an intimidating situation? Is this something that gets ingrained in them?
No, anytime they have that perception. I first learned this, I was 27 when I first learned this process. I got asked to speak to 70 of the leading former oil executives in Houston, Texas at the Hyatt Regency Hotel. I was 27. I just opened up my shingle and opened up my office. And the topic, success and achievement. These guys are in their 70s, and there's 70 of them in a room, all sitting around round tables right after luncheon, and I'm supposed to speak on success. They're retiring and they've had multi-million-dollar businesses. I'm just starting out, just started my practice. And I'm thinking, I'm standing behind stage and I'm going, what I imagined myself speaking about just doesn't look exactly appropriate now that I see the audience. These guys are seasoned. I was expecting, a little bit younger guys. And so I immediately thought, okay, I'm now feeling a little anxious. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do? And as I was walking down the thing and they were introducing me, I'm stepping up onto the stage, this ingenious idea came out. I realized that everybody just about has a fear of public speaking. That's a big thing. So what I thought I'd do is my speech started out this way. I said, everybody repeat and then write this down. So they took command and they got a piece of paper out, get a piece of paper out, write this down. As long as you're green, you're growing. As soon as you ripen, you rot. That was my opening line. And people are going, what is this? And I said, as long as you're green, you're growing. As soon as you ripen, you rot. If you're committed to doing something, you're growing. But if you've ripened and you're rotting, then that's it. So if you're 70 years old and you're retired and you're not doing anything, you're rotting.
You're rotting. You
So
call
I
them
said,
all
but
out.
if you're green and if you're green, you're growing. That means you're growing, you're learning something. So I got off the stage, I took the microphone. I knew they had a fear of public speaking probably in front of their peers. And I said, so what is your biggest fear that you're breaking through right now? And what is the mission that you're on now that you've retired? And now they got the fear of public speaking and I'm in command with the microphone. And all of a sudden they're going, oh my God, what will people think if I don't say the right thing? And they're all like, and I went around the room and made them all do it. And they're like frightened of being the next person in line to, and I did the whole thing. At the end, they gave me a standing ovation. I never gave a speech. I just put them through all the fears that I was starting with.
It's about reframing your expertise and your specialty against the audience that you're stressed out about and intimidated by. That's what you did.
But if you want to do really well in the speaking, is make sure you have at least 4 times the amount of material presented. So there's no M's and O's and the kind of stuff. Understood. So if you got a half-hour talk or an hour talk, have 4 hours of material ready where it just comes, you want to pour out with it. And you won't hem and haw, and only talk about what's something you know about until you gain confidence to be able to do that implicit
to do what you
learning.
Did. Do what you did. No, that's not fair. You did know about it. You just learned about it very quickly. Okay.
Only half of me knew about me knowing about it.
All right. The last topic, which I want to go into, which is very important. You have a controversial, I would say controversial take on depression. I want the audience to understand what your view on depression is. It's one of your most watched YouTube videos of all time. So obviously it's topical. So what is depression? What isn't it? And how do you deal with it?
Well, I've worked with thousands of people with depression, so I feel very confident in tackling it. And you saw 2 weeks ago or 2.5 weeks ago, the biochemical model, which I've been debunking since 1990, just fell because research just proved that was a pharmaceutical marketing gimmick and to sell drugs. But what was interesting is depression, I define as a comparison of your current reality to an unrealistic expectation, delusion, or fantasy that you're addicted to. And you're holding on to an expectation. Now, let me give you some samples of that. Every human being lives by a set of priorities and set of values. And whatever's high in the value, they spontaneously make perception, decisions, and actions accordingly. And every action they take is based on what they believe will give them the greatest advantage or disadvantage in that moment. So you can only expect a human being to live in their values and to do what they think with the information they're presented with, whatever's going to give them the greatest advantage in that moment. That's what you can expect some human being to do. Anything else than that's crazy. If you hire somebody in a job and you don't know what their top values are, then you're probably going to end up with problems because you're going to expect them to be doing something they're not going to do. You got to know what that is. Now, what people do is they have unrealistic expectations on other people to live in their values, not the individual's values. And then they end up with anger and aggression, blame and betrayal, criticism and challenge, despair and depression, desire to exit and escape, futility and frustration, grouchiness and grief, hatred, hurt, irritability, insanity, which is the underlying foundation for depression. They also have expectations on human beings because of moral hypocrisies taught by traditions and conventions and mores of society, that you're supposed to be one-sided. And perfection is one-sided. Nice, never mean, kind, never cruel, positive, never negative, peaceful, never wrathful, giving, never taking. And these one-sided fantasies and unrealistic expectations, nobody can live by. So when you have an unrealistic expectation on somebody to live in your values, not their own, and to make decisions based on your priorities, not theirs, and expect them to be one-sided, support, never challenge, you have a fantasy and a delusion that is guaranteed to create the ABCDs of negativity and depression. You add those together and compound those, you got even more. Then you do that on yourself. You expect yourself to live outside your values, and this happens every time you get infatuated or intimidated by somebody and fit into society and wear your little chameleon mask. You end up trying to fit into people and do something that's not really yours. Almost everybody that's ever been infatuated with some new partner will do things they don't normally do to fit in for fear of loss of that partner and sacrifice a whole bunch of stuff and then store that as a memory of what they sacrificed in the relationship. So if you're expecting yourself to be living in somebody else's values, you're going to end up being angry at yourself and depressed with yourself. If you expect yourself to be one side, always positive, never down, you're going to have an unrealistic expectation yourself. Now, if you expect the world to be living in your values and the world to be one-sided, peace, never war, you've got unrealistic expectations. And these things compound and accumulate, and they're stored in the subconscious mind, and they're running our amygdala's impulses and instincts, and they're basically making us search for the fantasy to avoid the predator and try to avoid this challenge, and it's self-imposed. So I take people and ask them a simple question. If you're depressed, if you have the feeling of depression, you have content in the mind. You can't have fear of the unknown. You can't have depression of the unknown. You can only have what's on the mind at that moment. Because people can be depressed and then all of a sudden something else happens, they're preoccupied, they're not focused on their depression, they're not, because the content changed. If I go and find out the content, I ask them a question. What are you comparing your current reality to? Because anytime you compare your current reality to anything other than your current reality, you have a delusion. If you think that it should have been this, why isn't it this? Why am I not doing this? You're comparing it to some idea about something that's not even real. It's something you can conjure up in your mind abstractly. So you ask yourself, what exactly are you comparing your current reality to that's not fulfilling your fantasy? And then I find out what the fantasy is, and then I find out what's the drawback if you got the fantasy and what's the benefit of the current reality, and bring those down. What's interesting is, as you do that, dopamine levels change, serotonin levels change, enkephalons change, osteocalcin change, testosterone, estrogen. I can take every one of the signal molecules and transmitters in the brain, and I can ask questions, and I can rise them and make them rise and fall. If I ask you questions that make you feel more proud, I can make your serotonin go up. If I ask questions that humble you and humiliate you, I can bring your serotonin down. If I make you ask you a question, where have you exceeded your expectations, I can make dopamine go up. I can make every one of those transmitters go up and down with questions, because the quality of your life is based on the quality of the questions you ask. And the ratios of your perceptions are determining the ratios of these transmitters. When I taught embryology, I looked at all the signal molecules in epigenetics and traced them all the way into endocrinology and found out these patterns and found out what turned them on and turned them off. And I guarantee you we can do that without having to take a drug. The pharmaceutical industry is nowhere near as powerful as what our brain is capable of doing if we know how to use our brain effectively. So I'd much rather help them see those and break their delusions and unrealistic expectations and fantasies and appreciate their life. Because life is magnificent the way it is, but if you compare it to the way it should be and you fantasize, I mean, I've seen marriages break down because a female or a male has a fantasy, and they get this guy, or the girl gets this guy, and they have a fantasy of how they're going to make them, what they're going to turn them into. And then they're having an affair with the fantasy person, and then punish them when they're not matching the fantasy, and then wondering why the guy has the affair, and then, angry at them for not living up to the fantasy and bitter and want to get revenge over something that's concocted as a fantasy in their own mind. Men and women do this about how they're supposed to be in their relationships. I train people on how to transcend that so they're not trapped in these anger generators that they create self-imposed. So unrealistic expectations that are not lived up to underlie these things. And psychiatrists don't like that because they're a pharmaceutical model and they're used to giving out a drug. And I've studied neurology. I can tackle them on the neurology and the neurochemistry. I have no problem with that. but their model is not practical. A therapist is, a psychologist works with practical therapies. Psychiatrist is basically sells a drug. They give you this. If that doesn't work, try this. If that doesn't work, try this. The serotonin, the norepinephrine, and the dopamine uptake inhibitors, they put those in there to try to get those chemistries a little higher in concentration in the bloodstream in the brain. But that's not the most efficient way of doing it, in my opinion. And it's not giving people their power. It's robbing of their power instead of giving people their power back and training them how to master their perceptions, decisions, and actions.
I love it. I appreciate that. And for people that are listening, that where this message resonates with them, who are the individuals outside of yourself? Is there a certain practice of therapy that falls in line with this type of remedy for depression? Where would people go to explore more? And then we'll also ask just where people go to get more of you. But in this particular, with depression and therapy in general, more specifically, how do people go find out more and go get help if this is something that they want to go explore?
I've personally trained 7,000 people and using the methods on that. So I've got 7,000 out there around the world helping people with that. But there's psychiatrists that are also starting to study those types of things. There's lots of psychotherapists and therapists that are learning those methods. There's cognitive reappraisal methods. There's a lot of semi-close approaches that are emerging, in some positive psychologies. The problem with that, the positive movement, is the idea that you're expecting people to get always up. And this is foolish. Nobody's going to stay up. I did a research for 2 years. I could spend now. I've got another podcast in a minute, and another meeting in a minute. But I could easily show you that it's a futile thing trying to be up all the time. That's a fantasy. Don't waste your time trying to be one-sided. Bipolar condition is a byproduct of monopolar addiction and subdictions. And we go through and we try to be one-sided people, and that's guaranteed to let you down. So there are therapists out there, and there's varying degrees of them, varying degree of skills, but not all of them do that. Some are on the victim model, and they immediately say it's biochemical imbalance. They fell for the pharmaceutical model, and they just basically say, well, go to your psychiatrist on that. I don't want to tackle that. Others work through their complexes and conflicts they have. So you have a whole spectrum of people working with it. But I personally trained 7,000 people on how to deal with that.
Amazing. Okay, so let's wrap this up. So where should people go to get more of you, your social, your website? And then I also want you to answer the one question that I ask everyone after you drop all your handles and whatnot. What does success mean to you?
I don't use the word success. I use the word fulfillment, because success is a succession, and it usually means I always say success is a depurposing state, failure is a repurposing system. They're both homeostatic feedback, negative feedback systems trying to get you to be authentic and be an individual on a mission in life. So I don't pursue success. I think that's self-defeating. But fulfillment, I do. But I would define somebody with fulfillment as somebody who identifies what their hierarchy of values is and structures their life according to priority, delegating the lower priority things and sticking to the things that are deeply meaningful, fulfilling, that they spontaneously love do, so they maximize their energy, fulfillment, and meaning in their life. And that may be raising children, that may be being a pole vaulter, it may be racing, it may be running a massive business, it may be being an entrepreneur, it may be an architect, it may be some academic. Mine is teaching. If I structure my life, I've delegated everything. All I do is teach, research, and write. Everything else is delegated out. I haven't driven a car in 32 years. I don't cook. I have people specialists doing everything except those three things. And doing what you love and loving what you do on a daily basis, to me, is fulfillment. And so I don't like to use the term success on it, but some people use that term for it.
And where do people go and meet you, get more of your content, YouTube, social, website, all of that?
If they want to go to just drdemartini.com, they're going to have to be a Buddhist believing in reincarnation to be able to read everything on there and see everything on there, because it's going to take more than one lifetime.